Welcome everyone to the Moisky News for the 3rd of February 2020. Before we start, welcome to the fourth D-Day. Yes, we have finally left the European Union. Now we are still bound to them during the transition period, but we're not actually a member anymore of any of the political institutions. Which means now we get to the stage that I find to be the most fascinating. We have crossed the biggest hurdle, with many people getting quite angry about it, others quite happy. But now we get to the negotiating, and that doesn't start until March, which means until then, lots of posturing is going to take place, which is something I want to focus our energy on for today, because Boris Johnson has made a speech indicating what he would like to do when it comes to negotiating, the kind of deal he wants to get within the space of, well, actually only about 8 months. Once you take into account that this then has to go through Parliament, UK and EU, it would take a bit longer. So realistically, only 8 months to negotiate a trade deal. It should be noted with a level of scepticism this is quite a difficult thing to accomplish, as many other nations spent years to negotiate a free trade deal. But the UK has a slight edge because it was already a member, many of its standards are already aligned, so if you go down that path, perhaps it can be quite easily resolved. It is in fact a position the EU's chief negotiator Michel Barnier wants to go down. But let's start with Boris. Boris has called for a Canada-style free trade deal. We'll get to what that is in a moment. Also indicating that the UK will return to the withdrawal agreement if such a deal was not reached. Many have called this the scorched earth deal. We'll get to that at the end as well. Michel Barnier believes this is ambitious, but a trade deal could offer a required level playing field if certain agreements were made. For example, he would like reciprocal access to our fishing waters, something which I fundamentally disagree with because EU rules are quite harmful to the ecology of our fisheries. Under the EU-Canada deal, import tariffs on most goods have been eliminated between the two states. One country, one collection of countries. The BBC referenced it as two countries. Oh, what do we have here? Though there are still customs and VAT checks, and it should be noted there are certain issues when it comes to things like chicken and eggs. Boris Johnson used his speech to raise awareness to his desire to unleash Britain's potential, but also to raise the prospect of possibly reverting to World Trade Organization terms if the EU chiefs refuse to sign off on a Canada-style free trade agreement. With him being quoted as saying in a speech in Greenwich, "We have often been told that we must choose between full access to the EU market, along with accepting its rules and courts on the Norway model, or an ambitious free trade agreement which opens up markets and avoids the full panoply of EU regulation. On the example of Canada, we have made our choice. We want a free trade agreement similar to Canada's, but in the very unlikely event that we do not succeed, then our trade will have to be based on our existing withdrawal agreement with the EU. The choice is emphatically not deal or no deal. The question is whether we agree a trading relationship with the EU comparable to Canada's, or more like Australia's. In either case, I have no doubt that Britain will prosper mightily." I've said many times his optimism is quite contagious. I tend to stand by that still. Now, he has rejected the requirement for the UK to adopt Brussels-made rules on competition policies, subsidies, social protection, the environment, or anything similar any more than the EU should be obliged to accept UK rules, with him believing that it's right to seek a pragmatic agreement on security to protect our citizens without trespassing on the autonomy of our respective legal systems. During a speech in Brussels, Michel Barnier offered a somewhat contrasting vision to Boris Johnson's, with him believing the EU was ready to offer a highly ambitious trade deal as the central pillar of this partnership, which would include zero tariffs and zero quotas, but saying this was dependent on the UK agreeing to specific and effective guarantees to ensure a level playing field to ensure competition is and remains open and fair, with there also being a need for an agreement to exist on fisheries that will allow continued reciprocal access. Michel Barnier believes all goods coming into the EU will need to comply with its rules on health and or other standards, and as a result, goods entering the Union will be subjected to regulatory checks. The EU has also published a draft negotiating mandate with 3 components, which include general arrangements, economic arrangements, and security arrangements, with Ursula von der Leyen, the EU's European Commission President, saying that negotiations will be hard and fast, giggity, but that the closer the UK wanted to be on the bloc, or be to the bloc, the more of its common rules it would have to abide by. I tend to think it comes down to whether or not we want to abide by those rules when we trade with you, because the way this is being framed, it almost comes across as, if you trade with anyone, you've got to abide by our rules. You haven't framed this very well, I must admit. Now, the Canada-style free trade agreement was signed in 2016, and this can be a possible template to the UK's future relationship with the EU. The deal gets rid of tariffs on the majority of goods, not including eggs and chicken, because they're considered sensitive food items. The EU-Canada agreement means public contracts are opened up for each other's contractors, so Canadian companies can pitch to build French railways. Services is a sector which makes up 80% of the UK economy, are only partially covered by this deal, if this deal was what we agreed upon. And importantly for the UK, this type of agreement does not cover financial services, which means UK-based banks would not be able to serve clients in the EU without licenses from individual countries. I'm surprised you haven't taken that over as just one yet. The BBC very kindly referenced the EU as a country earlier anyway. Well, now, the scorched earth policy. For this, we're going to reference Sir Ed Davey, the current acting Liberal Democrat leader, who believes that a deal with the EU, like Australia's, is calling it no deal in all but name. Deliberately hollowing out our trade is nothing short of a scorched earth policy for our economy. I have a strange feeling scorched earth policy is now going to be the buzz term for no deal. Get used to it. With this, I'm very much interested to know what you think and how you believe the UK should proceed. I personally think we should hold our ground. I've always believed that, and if we couldn't agree terms, we shouldn't bend over to someone else. We are, well, we certainly will be on the 31st of December, an independent, sovereign nation, and we should not kowtow to others. We should certainly not give up our fisheries. We have enough issues as it is, and I certainly don't think just abiding by their rules to get a deal done is the right way forward. One must exhaust all avenues, and if one does not benefit our nation the most, then we should walk away and see who blinks first. So please do let me know in the comments below what you think.